Marlborough Downs Nature Enhancement Partnership up in Wiltshire. And this is something that started, I think it's eight years ago now. And 10, my gosh, 10 years, gosh, times
David. 9.5.
And I think what we're going to do, we've got a presentation we'll take you through, but just a sort of a little bit of history about how it all started, and then leading into the sort of the practicalities of running a group with a group of disparate farmers, looking back and reflecting and looking at the pitfalls and looking at the way forwards. And I've given a few talks like this to similar groups as yourselves who are considering setting up and where to go and what to do and what not to do. Obviously, it was a different time. There were different funding arrangements available when we first started. But if we take you right back, and Gemma, do you want to bring up the presentation? You probably have to share the screen, Edward.
Okay, do you want me to run through this then? Is that the plan?
Yeah, I think if we dovetail on this, Gemma, and then go from there.
Okay, so I can't share the screen, so you'll have to enable me.
Edward, can you let Gemma share the screen, please? If not, I can bring it up here. If you want.
It's good. I'm good now.
Are you?
Screen, yes, and presentation, I hope. Sorry, I couldn't set it up in the background because obviously I've only got one screen. And it's opening or not. Sorry, talk amongst yourselves for a moment. Here we are. Can everyone see? Oh, what? Everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Jolly good. Right, I'm closing you out of the way. Okay, so we first started talking about this back in 2011, so it's nearly 10 years ago, not quite, but nearly 10 years ago. So doesn't time fly when you're having fun, Chris?
Yeah, too right.
Okay, so Chris, do you want to say why we did this? Why we got together?
I think it was a case of, you've got to understand that up until 10 years ago, DEFRA had very much been, as we all know, it's very top down. What do I mean by that? You'd get a book, you know, the countryside stewardship or whatever, and it would be in black and white, what you could do, what you couldn't do, very prescriptive. And I think farmers and landowners felt it was sort of, it's like having a scratchy shirt on your back. You felt very much you were being dictated to. And it was Teresa Dent of the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust who persuaded DEFRA that you should give farmers and landowners a trust them to come up with their own ideas with a bottom-up approach. I.e. to say, what do you want to do on your own farm, which you know would be good for wildlife, good for the environment? Because farmers, landowners know, but DEFRA really didn't trust us. It was Richard Benyon, who was Under Secretary of State at the time, who came up with this phenomenon of what they call a nature improvement area. And he said, we're going to put this out as a competitive tender, and we're looking for 12 organizations nationally to prove that this bottom-up approach can be trusted. 76 organizations went in for it. Most of them were national parks, AONBs, and 2 of them were farmer-led. One up on the Marlborough Downs and one down in Hampshire. And when I read the small print, and I phoned up Gemma, I remember phoning her up and said, hey, I think there's something on here, we can do this. It seemed to me that they wanted 10,000 acres, and that was the minimum criteria. So I thought, well, I was looking after 7,500 acres. I managed estates up on the Downs. I thought if I got a few friends to come with me and along with Gemma, we can make this work. Then I read the small print. 25,000 acres, 10,000 hectares, not acres. So then I sat down with Gemma and we worked out, whoa, how do we get 25,000 acres? And we mapped an area. And probably want to go on to the next slide to show it, Gemma. And then
can I just let's go back a little bit further than that, though. I think historically, Chris and I had first met on as part of an initiative called the Downland Heritage Initiative, which covered, as you can see, about nearly 25,000 hectares on the Marlborough Downs and the Pewsey Downs. So we'd sort of already got to know some of the farmers in that area, and I'd talked to them about kind of landscape scale projects. So it wasn't an entirely new idea. Chris, as he's just said, as Musgrave Management Systems, looked after four estates, that is, isn't it? So that's four separate estates, but as a kind of managed as a fairly cohesive unit, I guess. So Chris managed the farm and all the agricultural side of things, as well as, you know, the kind of broader estate management. So there's quite a lot of woodland and other kind of more semi-natural habitat on those estates. And I advised on the agri-environment in that area. So we had 2,500 hectares there, look, almost the 10,000 acres that we thought initially that we thought we needed. But ultimately, as Chris said, 10,000 hectares. So we literally drew a line on the map, and that's what we came up with: 10,370 hectares, bordered by the M4 to the north, and you can see Swindon up there above that. So we're the front garden of Swindon, which makes life quite interesting. And then trunk roads from Marlborough up to the M4, from Avebury up to the M4, and then the A4 across the bottom between Avebury and Marlborough. And that's how we started. And the NIA, the Nature Improvement Area, was that whole area that included everything in there. As Chris said, we asked all of the farmers within that area what they wanted to do on their farm, and we came up with a whole list of options. Chris, do you want to jump in there at all?
Well, it was interesting. Imagine this had started in, say, June of 2010, and here we were trying to get a group of disparate farmers and to work together, who'd never worked together collectively. And I remember we drew everybody together into a barn in October, sat them all down and said, look, there's a new scheme that's coming up. I don't really know the rules because it was unwritten. We were writing our own plan at that time. But it was a chance to say, exactly as I said before, what do you want to do on your farm that you know would help the environment? And everybody had their own different ideas, which was rather nice. And you can see from the graph here, all the different things that people would come up with. It was on that basis that the DEFRA slimmed the 76 organizations down to 20. And we got through to the final 20. And they then said, right, now you've got to write a business plan. And you've got to write a business plan for what you would do over the next 3 years if you got the funding. Now, I'm sure any of you who've been involved in writing business plans will know that a lot of people can have an input, but actually only one person can write it. And that sadly fell on Gemma's shoulders. And it was a hell of a thing to do. I think it nearly broke her and broke me and broke everybody else around us. But she got it done. And we sent it up to DEFRA in London. And Gemma then disappeared off to Africa, and we were invited up to London to present. And I went with Teresa, and we presented our case. And lo and behold, they slimmed the 20 organizations down to 12, and we were the only farmer-led NIA to get through in the country. On the back of that, obviously, we had the world and his wife on our back over the next 3 years. We had every government minister looking at us, what are we doing? And then it was the interest. When something's good, everybody wants to be a part of you. And much as we had a very delineated line of where we would, which farms were enclosed, those on the periphery wanted to be included too. And then we started to get interest from other groups saying, how can we start something like this? And you're probably aware of what we call the cluster movement, which is Teresa Dent's has kicked off. But I think nationally now, there are 92 cluster groups.
No.
How many?
Okay, so in terms of groups, so if you look at the cluster model, that is one particular model, which is quite, the GWCT model, which is quite defined. And I don't know how many groups would identify themselves as clusters. But in terms of groups of farmers working together at a landscape scale, there are probably 200 now, some of which are funded and some of which aren't. But again, I'm going to drag you back slightly here, Chris, just because I think the remit was to just give a bit more of an idea about the structure and the funding and how the project and the partnership was set up. So without leaping ahead too much, the initial nature improvement area grant was the initiative was a 3-year pilot project to find out if so each organisation that Chris mentioned earlier was actually a partnership. So each application came from a partnership. And we were in partnership with GWCT and with Wiltshire Council, but the two partners were very much there to support the farmers. It was very, very, very definitely and decisively and intentionally a farmer-led project. So we felt that, that way, if we fell flat on our faces, we only had ourselves to blame. But also, if it was a success, we couldn't, we didn't want other people taking the credit. We wanted to be very clear that this was a farmer-led initiative. And as you've heard, it was a great success, and it's rolled out. And the kind of farmer-led element of it has come across and remained very strong. We were funded from April 2012 to March 2015. We had a massive budget, which was really too much. We didn't really know what to do with it. We spent the first 6 months trying to get ourselves organised because we had to set up a partnership, a project, a bank account, all of these things which a lot of the other partnerships or organisations kind of had. They could piggyback onto a wildlife trust, for example, or as Chris said, an AONB or a National Park Authority or the RSPB or any of those kind of usual suspects. But we really were starting from scratch. But as I say, in the first 6 months, we managed to set up a limited company, a charity. So we became both in terms of organisational structure because there wasn't anything more suitable at the time. We can talk about that a little bit later if you want to explore that. We set up the project. We had to write all our policies. So we had to have all these ridiculous policies like health and safety policies and finance policies and volunteer policies and all these things. So the admin burden was absolutely huge. And we had all this money that we had to spend, and it was very, very stressful, let's put it that way. But it was also great fun. Because we had lots of money to spend on lots of fun things. So we had revenue payments and capital payments. And our project, our business plan included events, both for farmers and for a wider audience, lots of different activities, workshops, public engagement, project management, and kind of everything. So we had a very comprehensive budget, which was fantastic. And again, we can talk a bit more. I think what I want to do in this session is just sort of run through the skeleton, and then we can pick up the bits that you're interested in as we go on. So if you're interested in what we did during that first project, then obviously we can expand upon that. As I say, we're a limited company registered charity, and we had a fairly formal structure, which was centered around the partnership board. So the farmers, the farmer group, the charity, the trustees, directors of that organisation were the farmer representatives on the board, and then there was also someone from Wiltshire Council and someone from GWCT. We had a whole project management team, so that was me and lots of other people helping out, and we also had a company secretary / accountant who helped with all that sort of side of things. We had various specialist advisors, ornithologists and archaeologists and wildflower specialists and ecologists and all sorts of people who were involved. And then the actual kind of delivery, we had 4 delivery groups, and they were deliberately named delivery groups because steering groups implies that you steer somebody else to do something, whereas a delivery groups implies that you actually get stuff done. And that was always the intention, was that we were going to do stuff on the ground. So each delivery group was responsible for making decisions about how we were going to, you know, what activities and events and, you know, what we were actually going to do in terms of the different, you know, in the different themes of the project. We also had money to monitor and evaluate what we were doing. So we kept very good records, and we, you know, we have a very good idea of what we actually achieved during that period. Chris, before we go on to this, do you want to say anything else about that initial 3 years?
I think it's, if I was talking to a group as we are today and saying, where have we learnt? Farmers coming together, and I'd say the group of, you know, amateur farmers who'd never set up anything like this before. And it was the shock of, you know, the euphoria of being chosen and getting through, and then saying, whoa, how do we now go forwards? We were running with our ears taped back, I assure you. And it wasn't easy. The first 6 months, we had no money at all, because DEFRA, in their wiseness, take an awful lot of time to try and get that funding coming through. So in order to get Gemma to work with us, she worked FOC for 6 months on the proviso that, you know, that we'll get some money come through at some stage. Trying to keep egos and politics out of it and try to get people to work together. I think initially everybody thought it's all about money. We've got, wow, £550,000. I've got 10,000 acres. Wow, that's my chunk. No, that's not what it's about. It's about the environment, the landscape, the sustainability, what we can do with it. And we learned as time went on that actually it wasn't so much about the money. It's about working together. As I reflect back, it's a bit like a social science exercise and what we've learned and the fun we've had and the achievement we've had. We put in, up on the downs, the chalk downs, there's a lack of water. And we found that if you put in dew ponds, we made dew ponds all around the downs, bring in a water source, and the wildlife that come in on the back of that is fantastic. It was brilliant to be able to see all this. The buntings, the linnets, the skylark, the barn owl, the deer. And not to say that they weren't there before, but they weren't there in those numbers. I went to the Downs in '83, and a lot of the biodiversity had been killed off because of warfarin, the rat poison. And it was wonderful to create the habitat to move on. We brought short-eared owls back on the downs. And why? Because we put in long tusky grass. And on the back of that, then you get the shrews, you get the voles, and of course you get the owls coming in. And we've now been able to take a species and move it along the downs, which is just fantastic. And to get the kick from that too. So farmers are, you're proud of the piece of land you look after. Of course you are. There's a certain amount of, I want to do better than my neighbor too. We came up with this term, lapwing envy. I've got more lapwings on my farm than you have, and guess why? Because we're doing the correct things for it. It was many things, but not least learning how to work together, making sure we're always having fun, and trying to see the bigger picture of where does this all end up, and also making it available for people. The picture up there is to do with carriage driving. And up on the downs, we had carriage drivers, and basically was driving for the disabled. And in order for them to access different farms, they had to go on main roads to go from farm A to farm B. And all we did was say, hey, listen, Mr. Farmer A and B, why don't we knock a hole in that hedge or put a gate in there too? And therefore, these people, they don't have to go up on a main road to get from farm A to farm B. And anybody who's ever been on a carriage, I can assure you, with cars going by at 50 miles an hour, it's not a lot of fun. And I put it to you that a lot of these people who are disabled and riding for the disabled, a lot of them, we've got the army barracks in Tidworth and Bulworth here. A lot of these people have come out of Afghanistan with their limbs blown off. But you can ride a carriage just as easily from a wheelchair as you can do from a normal chair. And it was wonderful just to say, what are we doing? We're allowing people access on bridleways that exist anyway. We're just giving a gate or a hole in a hedge for them to access between farm A and B. We're not giving away prescriptive rights of access. And it was just, and they're only going to go around the outside of fields anyway. And that's where the fertility is pretty low anyway. It was a chance to give something back. And I'm sure you can do many things in life, but we all know what the rate of return in farming is. But to be able to help people too, it opened up the eyes of a lot of farmers up on the Marlborough Downs, I can assure you.
Okay. So the reason it says landfill tax at the top of this lovely photograph is because we actually funded this project separately. So we got additional funding through the landfill tax. I can't remember, there's a special word for it, isn't there? But whatever it's called. So we have Hills Waste near us, so they have, they pay into landfill tax. We applied for funding. I think we got £20,000. So as Chris said, we put in. To begin with, the driving for the disabled carriage driving group had about, I think they had a 100-hectare field that they used to go round, which was lovely, but there was so much more for them to explore. So we were able to, as Chris said, open up new access points, upgrade the surface of a byway to allow the carriages to access it, and also get a lot of the farmers to allow them access just down farm tracks where there wasn't any right of access, or along field margins. And I think, as I say, it was £20,000. We actually won an award for this project within Wiltshire, and we opened up 8 miles, I think, of tracks for these guys to ride across, which obviously then makes it worth other groups coming to visit, because they can get out for a reasonable amount of time. So it was a great project, and we, as I say, that was our first sort of foray into additional funding through the landfill tax.
And there was always a thing from the outset that farmers were scared about access. There's always, oh, hang on a sec, I'm not sure about this access thing. We're always, my farm is my castle and don't you dare come on it type thing. This was never abused. It's now been running, I think, for 7 years, and it's worked perfectly. And I think there's a real learning in that.
Absolutely. And just in terms of access, it was not just about access for specific groups of people. One of the things that I would say at the end of that first 3 years, the change in the community was huge. So the local community had all heard about the project because we'd done so many kind of activities with the public. And interestingly, Chris mentioned the meeting that we sort of started off. We started off with just the farmers saying, what do you want to do? Once we knew we had the funding, we invited stakeholders. And I can remember standing at the front of that room and looking around and thinking, okay, there's a table over there that's Wiltshire Council. There's a table over there who's the bird watchers. There's a table over there that's the ecologists. There's a table over there that's the farmers. Everyone was kind of, in their own little silos, if you like. At the end of 3 years, we had our sort of final social get-together. Adam Henson came to talk, which was really great. So that drew the crowds. But when I looked out over that room, it was a tapestry, it was a mosaic. There wasn't, there was no, the ornithologist was sat next to the farmer, was sat next to the archaeologist, was sat next to the rights of way officer, that was sat next to the farmer, that was sat next to the next door farmer's son. So the kind of whole community spirit changed over those first 3 years. At the end of which we were all exhausted. But just in terms of the project, so the Marlborough Downs Nature Improvement Area Partnership and project, which, as I say, was made up of the farmer group, the GWCT and Wiltshire Council, with the DEFRA grant, big DEFRA grant delivering a single project. After 3 years, that all finished. So we then had to decide where we were going to go next. And so the next stage, we kind of rebranded ourselves. We didn't want to be a nature improvement area. That sounded a little bit a bit kind of false. And the project was about the people, so it was a partnership. So we became the Marlborough Downs Nature Enhancement Partnership. And the partners within that were the farmer group Black Sheep, which is my company, so the sort of project management team, and Wiltshire Council. So GWTT went off on their kind of cluster path and kind of left us to our own devices, which they had to a certain extent anyway. The project, we renamed the project Space for Nature, which came out of the original document produced by the team who started off the NIA idea. So we are now the Marlborough Downs Space for Nature project, and we have various income streams for various projects within that sort of overarching Space for Nature. So we get member subscriptions, we get donations and fundraising money in. We've got some countryside stewardship. We had some countryside stewardship and other grants, and we had some charity funds. So I think, Chris, do you want to, and that says now, hold on a second, let me just see where we're going with this. I can't remember, sorry. So we're now 10,000 hectares, but if you look, all of the 10,000 hectares is now farmland, whereas before the 10,000 hectares included, you know, kind of everything within that boundary. Now we've spread out, and we've got contiguous farms and farms who've got bits in and out. So it's very much more about the people rather than an area per se. So member subscriptions. Chris, do you want to talk a bit about member subscriptions and what drove us there?
I think if Gemma alluded to it, when we came to the end of the 3-year project, I think everybody thought we'd die. But funny how you learn by reflecting, and we suddenly realized that it wasn't the money that held us together. You've now brought all these farmers together who didn't always know each other that well. I mean, of course, you know the names of all the farmers in the area. That's the way the community goes. But I'd never worked with them before, and because we'd worked together over 3 years and gone to events and put things on, etc., we really got to know each other. And it was the sociability, as much as anything, that says we want this to continue. And very much so, we didn't want to be the word cluster group, because we're slightly maverick. You might get it from Gemma and I now. We're forging our own way, and we refuse, absolutely, capital R, to be held by any other group or dictated to by DEFRA or anything. It was lovely to free us up and say, right, write your own idea. What do you want to do? And it was empowering, really. So we went to the group. We needed enough funding to be able to pay for Gemma, to put on events, etc., to cover, you know, as we've got out there, project management schemes, also to go to apply for other funding. And there are funds out there. It's just a case of looking, and you've got to put the time in, someone like Gemma to go and do it with the skill level to be able to write those papers. Not easy, but you can get people to go and do it. But it proves to us that, you know, there are other ways of doing it. And we feel more freed up now than actually having all that money from DEFRA originally. No question about it.
Okay, yeah. So as well as the member subscriptions, which largely, as Chris said, covered the sort of boring stuff, we fundraised to look at community engagement. We also had some one-off small donations from various organisations. So there was a local business that gave us money to do their carbon offsetting, and we planted loads of shrubs with them and then got them out to come and plant them with our group. Thames Water, we've had a good relationship with Thames Water through Matt Pryor, who's our bird officer, who's a very enthusiastic amateur ornithologist. So we've had various bits and pieces, and then people just give us money, which is really nice. But the main bulk of our funding over the past 5 years has come through the Countryside Stewardship Facilitation Fund, which came out of the original NIA. So that was a pilot, and this is the Facilitation Fund was what they kind of learnt, if you like. And that said that they would fund farmer-led groups, partnerships that were farmer-led, to largely focus on delivering countryside stewardship priorities, which are biodiversity and landscape priorities. So just to go back, there was none of the community engagement involvements. So there's no funding for that. So as I say, we looked at having to fundraise separately for that. So the facilitation fund was a 5-year agreement and ran from the 1st of October. So we had a kind of not even 6 months, 6 months with no funding apart from, as I say, the memberships. But to be honest, we just needed a bit of a rest that year. Everybody was pretty exhausted because the first 3 years were very intense and very full on, and we'd learned a lot and got a lot done. So it's nice to have a little bit, just kick back and enjoy what we'd done, have a bit of a rest, and then pick up again after harvest that year. And it ran until the 30th of September last year, but because of COVID, they gave us an extra 3 months. So we've literally 3 weeks ago finished with our facilitation fund. We were offered an extension, but we declined, and more of that later. It was an annual payment of £10,000 plus £500 per holding. We had, at the end of the project, I think we started off with about 26, and by the end we had about 31 holdings involved, which was enough. I think once you get bigger than that, the number, the kind of the active involvement, if you like, of the individual farmers, and it's not just about the farmers, it's about their families, it's about the people who work on the farm, it's everybody who has anything to do with farming on the downs. But the individual kind of active participation reduces exponentially with the number of holdings that you have, if that makes sense. So you always end up with this small core group of people that do things. And the bigger the group, the more there are just on the periphery, not really contributing. So I think in terms of group numbers, that's something we can again talk about at the end if you're interested. The payments were very restrictive, so we were only allowed revenue payments. There was no capital funding at all. And it was very much aimed at training members. So the delivery, which was what we were so proud of in our nature improvement area kind of era, what we actually achieved on the ground during the facilitation fund, I can't really tell you, purely because the whole kind of sort of ethos of the fund was that they paid us to support farmers to deliver stewardship priorities through individual stewardship agreements. So in terms of group achievement through the facilitation fund anyway, I would struggle to tell you what we achieved in those 5 years as a group. I can tell you what individual farmers achieved, but as a group in terms of biodiversity and landscape, I'm not sure. So had its limitations, but now it's over, and that's one of the reasons that we chose not to continue, was because we felt it didn't really deliver. I'm going to stop there for a moment. Chris, do you want to say anything else about this?
Yeah, I think the big thing, because I can see people saying, well, hang on, what have you done? And the big part of what we did was events.
Yes.
I just written a few down. I mean, we've got loads, but we put on bat walks. So you can meet
these were all public events.
Yeah, public events, absolutely.
They weren't paid for through the facilitation fund, and that's the whole thing.
Yeah, but people got to know in the area that we put things on, come and learn about the environment around. So what's a bat walk? You go out at night with these bat recorders, and you hold them up in the air, and they peep, and you can see what bats up there, and the kids love doing it. Great fun. We put on harvest. Walking in the hedgerows and finding harvest mice nests, and that was fantastic. And once you know where to go looking and what to look for, it was wonderful. It just made walking in the countryside more fun. A fungi foray. We got an expert in to go and walk up on the downs in September and show us what fungi you can eat and what you can't, and we made a meal, etc. Lovely to go and do. Barn owls. We did a thing called an owl prowl, whereby we got the people from Swindon up on a trailer, took them up on the downs. And you've never seen little owls up on the downs, or barn owls or short-eared owls, whatever. It's wonderful. And for people who've never had that experience, it blew their mind. Cost us nothing. I'll come on to bees because that's a separate thing. We got into obviously dew ponds and then supporting the dew ponds with wildlife corridors. So every half mile or so, we put in 15 dew ponds. There were 9 there originally. We had 24 dew ponds up on the downs, linking them with a wildlife corridor. That really, that changes things, I can assure you. Hedge laying courses, vibrant verges to go and identify species. We can all, some of you are probably very good at doing this. I'm not, but I love to be shown. If you can show me what it is, then I can remember. Dew ponds, dipping dew ponds, what's in there, how do we make sure they remain healthy, soil fertility, earthworms, etc., willow wreath workshops. It goes on and on. Do you want to go on the bee one, Gemma?
Yeah, okay, so in terms of just going back to what I said before though, in terms of actually delivering stuff on the ground, most of what we actually achieved on the ground was through the NIA project. What we then built upon, as Chris said, was the kind of activities and events. And we were quite creative in that we, we invited lots of other people, not necessarily just the farmers. So we were, yeah, again, we can talk about it afterwards a bit more if you like. Bee roads. So I applied for, I met a lady called Millie who had this idea about bee roads, linking local communities along roads and looking at how we can create good bee foraging habitat along those kind of corridors, if you like, based around roads between villages, really. And the logo says it all. So if you imagine this is your town or your village, and these are all your neighbouring villages, we've created bee roads. We actually created 4. So you create bee roads between the villages, these overlap. And within all of that area, you then start to create all this habitat, but also just raising awareness. And then the idea is that, this village here then links up with this one here and this one here and so on and so forth. So these little flowers kind of pop up all over the landscape. We got £10,000 for our Bee Roads campaign. And during that year, I think we did, I can't remember how many, 30 odd events and activities, ranging from everybody from kids to, well, literally preschool kids to, senior citizens. I think we had one event where we had somebody that was 92 and someone who was 2 days old. So, I mean, literally the whole spectrum. We went and did all sorts of activities. We went out and did things. We invited people on farms to go and do wildflower walks and various other things. I think one of the main achievements that I was hugely proud of was we managed to plant 11,000 spring flowering bee-friendly bulbs with about 20 different community groups. So we supplied the bulbs through the grant, and we had bulb planting weekend when everybody planted their bulbs and took photographs, and we shared them on social media and all of that sort of thing. So that was really good fun and kind of gave us a bit of a buzz to pun.
It was also the whole education bit of saying, do we realize that 1/3 of the world's food is pollinated by bees? 1/3, yes, 1/3 of the world's food is pollinated. Most people don't know that. And then you say, well, actually, you've got a population rising from 7.7 billion, supposedly going to go to 9.5 billion by 2050. And yet the bee population is being decimated, not least because they get colony collapse disorder, which is a bit like you having flu and not recovering. They get this varroa mite. It's like you having a leech on you, it's draining you. We all know about neonicotinoids, which is this pesticide applied on oilseed rape, and the lack of habitat. But when you make people aware, especially landowners, about lack of habitat, what can we do? What can we do in terms of putting in pollen and nectar mixes? And then we went into schools and got all the kids putting in flower pots and putting pollen nectar mixes. And so the kids were learning, the adults were learning, having some fun and recognizing we all live in this world together. We've got to wake up and say, what do we need to do?
It was great fun. It was intense again, very intense, but really great to have some funding to kind of reconnect with our local communities. We've been a bit sort of loving a shoestring for a while because we didn't have the funding to do much, but that was brilliant. I think we connected with about 4,500 people that year. It was ridiculous. So locally, the Marlborough Downs Space for Nature is a really, a well-known brand now. So locally, everyone in the area knows about it, which is fantastic. And we've made a lot of friends. We've made, we've worked with lots and lots of different people, and and really, I think people are much more, that kind of whole farmer, non-farmer community engagement thing is brilliant, and has been a really good thing that people have enjoyed. Moving on to additional other funding sources, then we've been really lucky as well to have some charitable funds donated to us. These are when, well, the first one, Kilcrogan Trust, was a charity which one of our members was a trustee, and the charity was closing down, was winding up, and they offered some of their residual fund to us. So I think they gave us £50,000. That was to develop a space for nature reserve. So we found that we were getting a lot of visitors. It was brilliant, and we had visitors from people like you guys from other groups coming to see us, but also ministers and school groups and the Cubs and everybody, the Wilderness Wife, all wanted to come and see what we were up to, which was brilliant, and we loved doing it. And we charged around the Downs, showing different people different things, but it was quite time consuming in that the Downs are a big area, and we were dragging people from one end to the other to show them all the different stuff, and we felt that it would be really helpful to have everything in a small space so that we could show people, we could demonstrate how to build a dew pond, or how to build a bug hotel, or create a wildflower meadow, or whatever, pollen nectar mixes, bird mixes, all of those sorts of things. So we could use it to demonstrate all the different things that we did. We could use it for education. So for when we had school groups, for example, we could we could focus on that area, and that we could also carry out some research, because we were doing various bits and pieces all over the place. So again, we kind of wanted to focus really. So we've got a small area, not very big, it's about an acre or so, a bit more than that, maybe a couple of acres. Where we've got all sorts of stuff going on. And then we've got a chalk pit nearby and a dew pond nearby. We're creating a wetland, more of that later, nearby. So there's all sorts of things going on there. We've got a farm and bird programme, which is also supported by the Kilcrogan Trust, and that focuses or centres around Matt Pryor's work, so very much on tree sparrows. We've got the biggest tree sparrow population anywhere in the world. Well, not quite, but so we're hugely proud of our tree sparrow population. We feed them all year round. We create tree sparrow villages. We do all sorts of tree sparrow corridors, all sorts of exciting things with tree sparrows, but also corn buntings, lapwing that Chris mentioned earlier. We're really lucky. We've got yellow hammers, yellow wagtails, linnets, or the kind of the farmland bird hot list is all up on the Downs. Sadly not turtle doves, but pretty much everything else, stone curlews, as I say, lapwings, all sorts. So that's all funded through Kilcrogan Trust funding, and we've recently managed to secure an additional probably about 30,000 from another trust, which is winding up residual funds again, and that's very much focused on conservation farming, so moving kind of from the edge of the field into the middle, so looking at all of the new innovations in cultivation, cover crops, herbal lays, mulberries, all of these kind of things that are flying around at the moment, and trying to get a bit of education, a bit of understanding about how different things work and how they might work on the Downs. And just exploring that side of things. So that's the Bybrook Trust Fund, and I think, Chris, do you want to say anything else about that?
No, only in the sense that we pointed out earlier that we're going out to look for our other forms of funding. They do exist, but you've got to have somebody who's prepared to sit down and write out the proposal. And if you've got to invest in that, you've got to go and invest in it. Most people don't have that skill level. But the point is that the funds are there.
Video, how interesting.
Okay, here we are on Wednesday the 30th of September 2020, and the weather forecast is pretty wet. You can see that all the grey cloud rolling in from the west there. But James Hussey did a brilliant job with these men last 2 days. They have sprayed it again, graded it, chain harrowed it.
Okay, so that's our Space for Nature Reserve. Now, Chris, you'll back me up there. That was a jungle, wasn't it? I mean, it really was. So we've now seeded it all with wildflowers and grass mix. So we're gonna manage that as we would manage a much larger area. But as I say, for demonstration purposes. Just going back to the structure, our structure has changed quite considerably with our sort of circumstances. Partnership board is still there, still made up of the farmer group, but as I say, Black Sheep and Wiltshire Council, sharing that kind of strategic overview. Project manager, no project management team anymore, sadly, just me. Specialist advisors still give their time very freely, which is great. And we've kind of refocused, if you like, and we've got 2 delivery groups now. One very much focused on biodiversity and landscape. So this is the kind of on-farm stuff. So delivering on the ground, looking at wildlife management, looking at conservation, agriculture, the historic environment, and linking it all up and encouraging people to work together, but actually looking at how we deliver on the ground, not just talk about it. And then the community outreach group, which is very much looking outwards rather than inwards, and engaging with stakeholders, with the public, and with other special interest groups. So we have all sorts of people working with us now. So we have, for example, the Richmond Fellowship work with people who are recovering from mental health illnesses and issues. We have the Harbour Group, which supports refugees and asylum seekers who are based in Swindon. So these people are often from rural areas and they're stuck in Swindon. So we did a welly amnesty, and we invited everyone to just give us their old wellies so that we can welly up these people and take them out on the farm and just give them a bit of fresh air and a walk and meet the cows and whatever. So that's great fun. We work with bird specialists, bird watching groups, with WIs. We're trying to establish links with our local care homes and do something for people suffering with dementia. I mean, you name it.
I've just got to come in. There's one. I know time and you want to have questions, but one day we put on was for young carers. And this is for young people caring, particularly with an adult in their family who'd got dementia. And by gosh, was it riveting. And these were children who we got out on the farm, who'd been looking after their parents with dementia. And what we do is pretty simple. We were crushing apples and making apple juice.
You were crushing apples.
We had somebody else doing a sheepdog demonstration, which they loved. We had somebody else with goats there. It was just a chance to get these people up on the downs who'd been pent up in their reasonably small house in Swindon, and just get up on the downs and blow some hot air off. And you know what? And then we gave them all a bit of a barbecue at lunchtime, and off they went. I assure you, if you want a feel-good factor, it was magnificent. And the farmers who'd never had that link before, we didn't know how to link with it, have now found a link of how to do it. It's the conduit which we've created between the farming or landowners and the people around who are full of great ideas, but they don't know how to link with the landowners.
So yeah, going back to fundraising, and I've just written a bid for £20,000 for a science museum community social responsibility, whatever, I can't remember what it's called, sort of thing. So this is the Green Space for Nature project. So promoting green spaces as good places for health and well-being, particularly post-COVID. And we've put together a really, a year's worth of programme of activities and events for the public and for special interest groups. like those we've just been talking about, and also to develop a reed bed wetland system where people can go just for a bit of quiet tranquility and just chill out in the wildlife, in the countryside, and breathe some fresh air and get out of their houses and all the rest of things. So we're waiting to hear whether that'll be successful or not. But as you're probably gathering, there seem to be two kind of separate sets of funding. One, which is the kind of biodiversity, wildlife side of things, if you like, and then the other, which is the community engagement. And we found that we tend to have two pots of money at any time, focusing on those two areas. In terms of going back to, again, what Chris said about lessons learned, I think the big thing that we've learned is that the reason that this is so successful is because it's owned by the people who are delivering it. This project, this partnership is owned by the people within it, by the farmers. And interestingly, I did a survey recently about what people felt they got out of the project, because obviously as the old funding came, the Countryside Stewardship Fund came to an end, we're kind of at the next stage now. We're starting on the next leg of our journey, if you like. And I wanted to make sure that we were, we kind of refocused on our direction and we all knew where we were going and that we were all comfortable with it. And I gave people a list of things that, they might have got out of the project, shall we say. Top of the list was learning about wildlife. Second was meeting people, specialists, learning from specialists and getting information and learning about the landscape. Sociability, meeting the public, getting involved with the local communities, etc., etc. Down at about 8th was funding for projects. So that, I think, is really, really, really telling as to how far we've travelled in that 10 year, almost 9.5 years that we've been going. So in terms of ownership, everybody has invested, and that maybe money, yes, everybody put their hands in their pockets and came up with a bit of a subscription 5 years ago. But we've not asked for any money since. But in terms of investment, in terms of the amount of time, I could talk for hours about the different projects that we've done. We've just all planted little shrubberies with some plants that we've got from Woodland Trust, and everybody's just gone out and done it. I said, does anybody want any plants? Yeah, okay, I'll plant a few. So people have put a lot of time, but emotional investment, I think that's the key. People really love this project. People really want it to work, and they have a real commitment to making it good, to making it work. That brings a sense of achievement, a sense of pride. There's an element of competitiveness, as Chris said, but it all kind of adds up to a sustainable system. Sustainability is the key, I think. So many projects, they're funded for 3 years, end of 3 years, that's it, move on, next project, new project officer, new faces, new people, new system, etc. Whereas because this is owned by the people on the ground rather than some organisation and some project officer that they bring in, it's just, I can't see it's ever going to end. I'm really amazed that we're just going from strength to strength. It's not waning at all. But I think the real key message is that it's about relationships. It's about the relationships within the group. So the relationships between the farmers and their families and the people who work on the farm, and the gamekeepers. And then going wider, the specialists, so the bird guy and the wildflower people, the ecologists, the catchment sensitive farming officer, all of these people that the farmers used to be quite suspicious of. Now they're kind of part of the club. So, somebody knocks on the door and says, Gemma said that I could come and talk to you about X. People open the door and say, yeah, come in, have a cup of tea. Whereas, if they just knock on the door and said, I want to talk to you about X, they may have been sent away with a flea in their ear. And that just doesn't happen. So we've got a fantastic community. And I'm really, really proud of that. And I'm really proud of the fact that, as I say, the local communities own this project as well. They feel part of it. They understand much more what the farmers are doing up on the Downs, and they've got pride in it as well. And I think that's the real achievement. And that's the end of what I wanted to say on this. So Chris, back to you.
Okay, I think if we can share the screen back, please, Gemma, and let's get everybody up there again, please. Okay, we've given you an hour, we've given you an overview Obviously, trying to get it all in 60 minutes is quite difficult. I think the thing to do now is to open it up to questions and to see where you're coming from. What are you interested in? And Gemma's got to go at 6 o'clock. So we've got half an hour. So questions, please.
It's Julian Branscombe here. I'm fascinated that you've managed to get good contributions from charitable trusts. Was there a personal connection between someone involved with Marlborough Downs and one of the trustees of one of these charitable trusts?
Yes. The first one, as I say, one of our members was a trustee, and the second one, I knew the main trustee of the second one. So yes, it was very much about personal connections.
It comes back to your relationships point, doesn't it?
It does, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Nick.
Yeah, I've got a question. It comes over really clearly that it's about people and getting people together and getting that relationship established. How did you convince people in the first place that it was worth their time to spend on this? Because farmers are busy people.
Completely. I mean, it's a great question. And do you know what? If you'd asked me 10 years ago, I said, not a chance. But I can tell you something, and Gemma hit on it right at the end. Farmer to farmer, peer pressure. You'll trust. If a farmer says, hey, that person's okay, you'll trust him. If that other person knocks on your door coldly, no way. And it was this farmer to farmer trust. As I said to you, when we got together in that barn, 10 years ago, and we also looked at each other, oh, you knew the name, didn't quite know the person. And then we realized, what do you want to do on your farm? It'll all be different. That's great, I respect that. But to start this process of working together and then acknowledging, this is quite sociable, it's quite fun too. Always it's got to be fun. If there isn't the fun element in it, I'm not involved, and neither would anybody else be. And I'm willing to work hard to get to that level too. But as I said before, when something's good because everybody wants to be a part of you. And because it's been progressive, because we've done different things, I wrote down a few things, why we've been successful. A structure, terribly important. You saw what Gemma put up there in terms of how we've got the board, we've got delivery groups. You've got to get your own structure, and it's got to be well managed. You need a good chairperson. You need people to really buy into it. You've got to challenge yourselves to keep it vital. So what do I mean? We never do samey. You can probably hear from what Gemma and I say, we're not like that. We just, what's new? I don't want to repeat what we did last year or the year before. What's new? What else can we do? And if you have that attitude, that keeps people excited, because it's not, oh, there they go again. It's, whoa, guess what they're on to now? That's terribly important. It's, yeah, I said what's next, and farmer to farmer pressure. Farmer to farmer, there's no doubt about it. This is how you get things done. This is how we've seen it seep in. And the strength within the group is what Gemma said when she did the survey a year ago or whatever, of what do they put first of all? Sociability. And damn it all, when farming is tough and Brexit and everything else, we all know how tough it is out there. Ever more to come together, to just acknowledge each other and to share something, not because of the money, is I can't put a value on that. And you'll get it down in Cornwall. No different to a group I spoke to in Devon or anywhere else. We're all the same, guys. It's a tough, lonely we work hard, very, very hard, for very small returns. But something like this that can give you a high, something you're proud of, something that's interesting, educational, and fun, yeah, I want to be a part of that.
Just to add to that, absolutely, totally agree with everything that Chris has said. Interestingly, a year into the NIA, the chairman of the NFU, what was his name at the time, Peter, somebody at the time, I met him at an event, and he said, my God, what are you doing on the Marlborough Downs? Everybody'd heard about it. And he said, how have you managed to achieve in a year what the NFU has been trying to do for the last 30 years? And I haven't got, the answer is I asked them. I asked the farmers. I didn't, people say, how do you make your farmers do this, that, and the other? How do you persuade that? I don't, I just ask, and people give. because people want to be involved. And I think just ask. It's not, it's not rocket science at all. And just in terms of structure, I now look after another group of farmers on Salisbury Plain. Now they're all MOD tenants, so it's a completely different sort of setup. And that group has absolutely no structure whatsoever. We have planning meetings and anybody can come along. So all of that, those little nice organisational charts that I showed you and all the rest of it, those are a bit of a legacy from the NIA because we had to set up, back at the beginning. But as I say, my Salisbury Plain Conservation Group has absolutely no structure. Different people come to the planning meetings, but it keeps it fresh because different people come along and have different ideas. So I think one of my big bugbears is the whole kind of let's brand everybody as a cluster. That's one way of doing it. So the cluster sort of format is that you have a lead farmer and then they kind of persuade, I don't know, we're not a cluster, so I'm not quite sure. But anyway, it's very much focused around a lead farmer. Neither of my groups have that, and a lot of other groups don't have it. And I'm really, really strongly against any kind of format because I think your group will find its own format. And rather than thinking, oh, well, we've got to be like this and we've got to do that and we've got to just find your own way, put something together that suits your group. You already have a partnership, obviously. You already have some kind of structure. So don't feel that you've got to change it to fit in with some kind of brand.
I'll just add on that. We were wary of DEFRA trying to take us over. And what do I mean by that? That here we were doing well, and we'd come away from this, as I said at the start, this top-down approach where you read the prescription and then you have to go out and do it. And is my margin 6 meters or crumbs? It's only 5.9 meters. Am I going to be in trouble and inspected and all? We wanted to get away from all that. And this is why I think the pressure is off the farmers. They feel right now, hang on, it's not DEFRA who's controlling that. A lack of trust from DEFRA. They allowed us to get this thing going. And then I think General said too, we felt the tentacles coming back in, even when they created this thing, a facilitation fund, i.e. you can get a facilitator to go out and help set up a group like yours. Well, Gemma started this facilitation fund. It was written on what she achieved with us. And here you are, DEFRA, trying to control it. We fought that, absolutely.
Which is one of the reasons we didn't renew our... Hello?
You've switched yourself off, Gemma. Cheryl.
Hi, Cheryl from Cornwall Wildlife Trust. I think the fact that you're doing your community outreach just out of the goodness of your hearts is brilliant. I wondered if there were any spin-offs in terms of, because that's your market as well. Have there been some happy spin-offs in terms of local produce? Or is it not that kind? I don't know what kind of farming you're doing, but are you getting more people sourcing locally? That's not why you did it, but did that happen?
We've got so one of our farmers, one of our members, starting to do meat box sales from the farm gate. So she's the Marlborough Downs Meat Company. And then, so this was youngsters. One of the things that youngsters, God, I sound really old, don't I? I am really old, I forget. So interestingly, when we set up the project initially, we had 5 or 6 next generation farmers coming back to the family farm to sort of take over, or to begin that process of taking over. So dad was retiring and son or daughter was coming in to kind of learn the ropes, having been away doing whatever, and that was a great way to get them introduced to the community, and they've loved that. They've really, really, really appreciated that, having someone to go to other than dad, maybe, to go and ask about something. But then, so Susie, who was one of these youngsters, started doing meat box sales, and then she found that she couldn't. So they do sheep and pigs, and then she didn't have beef, so she then paired up with a couple of the other youngsters. So Ben in Avebury, who does, I think they've got Angus, haven't they, Chris? I think, and Doug up in Rorter up in Overton has ruby red cattle. And so, you know, they've kind of come together and put together very loosely a sort of a box scheme which comes up. So that's, I think, been a spin-off. But I think the main spin-off, and one of the reasons that we wanted to do this in the first place, was that we were all, I mean, my family farmed, but I don't farm myself, but obviously I work with farmers all the time, and we're all sick to death of being blamed for everything. And, you know, nobody knowing. People phone me and say, how many hedgerows have been ripped out on the downs in the last 10 years? It's like, no, hang on a minute. How many hedges have been planted on the downs in the last, you know, people are stuck in the 70s and 80s. So one of the things that we wanted to do with that, really, I suppose, was just to get people into the 21st century and understand what 21st century farming is all about. And it's about food production, obviously, but it's about caring for the environment and for, you know, animal welfare and health, you know, all of the marvelous things that we do, that people just seem to think that we're still in the 70s and we're still spraying everything just willy-nilly without any thought, any care, or just because we can. And we're filling animals with hormones and, you know, all of these awful things that, okay, may have happened in the past, or did happen in the past, but, you know, really don't happen anymore. And we wanted to build that relationship and to improve the PR, wouldn't you say, Chris? That was a real driver.
No question about that. And locally, people know about us. But it comes back to Cheryl's question. I think one of the things we didn't set out to do is something we have done. We've created a brand. The brand Marlborough Downs is now, it's nationally known. And you think, wow, we didn't intend to do that. So in terms of the opportunity that would sit behind that, in terms of food boxes or whatever, that's another thing that hasn't really been tapped into yet and could well be. Yes, no question about it.
I ask a question, Chris?
Sure.
You've just sort of seen the end of the Countryside Stewardship Facilitation Fund. You're now, we're still a few years away from the Elms nature or the recovery, the sort of grouping together under component 2 and 3. You've also said that you don't really want to have too much natural England DEFRA involvement. Is that a road that you see you're going to go down?
Well, I think every farmer will do it differently, Edward. You've got to say, well, you know, certainly the rates of the rates aren't nearly as, Jem is far better at this than I am, but the rates aren't nearly as good as they were. And you've got to say, well, how prescriptive am I prepared to work under? And you know, it's a bit like a prostitute. Do I really have to go and do this, you know, for the amount of money that it's worth? Or can you look upon it a different way? Are there other ways of doing it? And we're totally, you know, we're off the spectrum. We are doing it a different way. We've got out and got our own funding. And I think there's more to go on top of that if we really want to tap into it. And, you know, I think people prefer it that way. There will be some farmers who say, okay, let's go with elms, but they don't like the prescriptiveness. And I think a lack of trust, I've said it before, I said it to DEFRA, Natural England, sorry, I think they've done an awful lot to cause farmers to distrust them.
Yeah. Stuart.
Hi, yes, really interesting talk. You can hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah. So I had problems with my mic earlier on. I was interested in, well, from a number of levels. I'm a farm advisor in the West Cornwall, and I actually live in the landscape Penworth Landscape Partnership area. As a farm advisor who deals with stewardships quite a lot and deals with farmers from small holdings right up to big dairies, we don't tend to have large arable areas, but certainly not cereal areas, but wrong part of the world. But I was interested in terms of, you're dealing with a significant area size, and although I totally hear you in terms of the individual members of the group liked a level of independence, a loose connection, a loose fit, perhaps less prescriptive. Some of these areas are very important either for biodiversity or for landscape or for history or all the above, and access. And I wondered how much it was difficult to balance. I mean, presumably when you say each of these individual farms delivered through their own stewardships, etc., I presume that there was some kind of steer or overview or prioritization of this is an important landscape for this. This is important for these key species. This habitat is very rare. We want to connect it up, blah, 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 blah. And I wondered how you actually did a steer or a guidance on that, so that you had different groups actually, or different farms actually working together towards a common goal, or how much of it was individual farms wanted to do almost like a chocolate box.
Okay.
I've always wanted one of these. I've always wanted to do that. How do you do that without being too controlling? You know, so
the secret. I'm going to pass to Gemma after this, but the secret is that she was acting for a lot of the farmers up in the Downs anyway, as you are, as their farmer environmental advisor. And what she was able to do was to link farms and to try to get the best, and to play the schemes too. I mean, look back at the oldest countryside stewardship. We played the scheme to try and get the maximum amount out of it. And no different to going back to DEFRA as it was and getting money for overwintered feeding. And we were doing this between farms, and we were feeding 25 tons of grain up on the Downs. That's a significant, but she got funding for that. And she got funding for all the farms because she wrote it into their prescriptions. Gemma, you better come in and say how you link them.
I think that,
and perhaps before you do answer, or add your bit, how much of it involved the farmers actually having to work together? Did you have to have cooperative working with the farmers? Because wildlife doesn't stop at a boundary between farmer A and farmer B. So were there did you kind of have to work some of these schemes up so there was better connectivity and complementary working, perhaps is what I'm...
Yeah, that's quite a difficult thing to answer. I guess a lot of it is kind of organic, in that, you know, when you're building a scheme, you'll know if you know what's happening on the next door farm, then you will build the scheme to complement the next door farm. So you kind of know what's happening in the wider landscape, so you help the farmer to build the scheme to fit within that wider landscape.
Well, absolutely, that's exactly my job. But that job is required. That's almost like having a strategic overview.
Oh, yeah,
but there's a danger that if you don't go hand in glove with the landowners, that you could seem as like a drop-in who's just trying to control everything.
No, yeah, it's very much about relationships, about my, you know, in this context, about my relationship that I've built up over 20 years with this particular group of farmers. Just to give you an example of one of the things that we did through the well, it was the old HLS schemes, really, I suppose, early on in the early days. Short-eared owls, we have wintering short-eared owls on the Downs, and they kind of popped up literally kind of the year that we started. That was the first year I think we saw those short-eared owls in the winter. And we also, the same winter, had a pair of Montagu's Harriers, which bred on the Downs for the first time in nobody knew about this. So we got very excited about this and thought we'd like to, you know, try and make sure that they came back. So we put together with various specialists a prescription under the old HLS scheme, which is under the Grassland Management for Target Features, so specifically aimed at hen harriers, other raptors, and owls, predatory birds. So what happens is that each farm undertakes to leave, so they graze on an annual, you know, during the growing season as you would normally, but then 1 year in 4 or 5, you leave an area. So sorry, I'm not explaining that very well. So on an annual basis, 20 to 25% of the grassland within that management kind of regime is left unmanaged. So it creates a real big tussocky, you know, structure for voles and mice and so on for foraging habitat. It can't be left longer than that, so it's got to be done on rotation, because otherwise it gets too dense and they can't get into hunt. So, you know, so it has to be done on rotation. So we designed these prescriptions, if you like, these management guidelines. So some, you know, grazing in the 4 years that you're not shut up, and then shut up for a year, and la da da. And we've got 5 or 6 farmers involved in that option, which is specifically tailored to our, you know, to our area and for those birds. And those land managers form a kind of big long corridor of grassland on the scarp, and everybody's doing this kind of management. So there's this patchwork of grassland, of areas of grassland that are left as foraging habitats. So in that kind of context, yes, we did work together very, very much. And there have been other examples, but that's probably the most obvious. But yes, I mean, when we're designing things, so when we put the ponds in that Chris said, you know, we designed a map. We did some kind of opportunities mapping exercises, and we said, right, we want best bang for buck. We don't want 4 ponds all in the same area. If you want a pond, you've got to put it over there, and it's got to be at least, I think we said 1,500 meters away from another pond. No, it's got to be, I can't remember what the deal was. Anyway, we had lots of donuts basically, which were our target area for ponds. So yeah, I mean, it's about sort of joined up thinking, but not necessarily about forcing people to. The last thing we want to do is force people. They pick and choose. It's a sweet shop. If you're interested in short-eared owls, you'll do the short-eared owl stuff. If you're interested in tree sparrows, and what we found was that people started off being interested in one thing and then became more interested in other things. So, you know, suddenly it was like, oh, I want tree sparrows as well. What do I have to do? So yeah, I don't know that I've answered your question, but I hope I've given you, yeah. I think it's about having me, that pivotal person, kind of that overview, and talks to all the farmers.
Thank you. That was good. Thank you.
I hope so. Sorry if it wasn't.
Well, is it identity is the critical thing, I wonder, that everybody feels they're part of something and they're all pushing towards the same thing?
Very much so. Very much about ownership, as I say. Very much about ownership.
Thank you.
Nick.
Just one more question. Did you find that everybody wanted to play?
Obviously, it was really interesting. We haven't got the map. When I first called that meeting in October, we'd mapped everybody who owned the land in that 25,000 acres. You could do it, and those who of the I think 42 farmers, 26 turned up to the meeting. Those who couldn't attend, we spoke to by telephone, and there were nobody saying no. There was one person who said, I don't want to be involved, but he wasn't negative about it. Everybody else was on side. Yes, it was quite interesting.
That's great.
Yeah. I mean, it was, as I said, you could equally look back on this as a social science experiment and say, how do you get people to work together? And you know, from everybody being, as I said, a farmer with it's my castle, don't you dare come across like we don't share, and envy and all the historic things that go. And I've been there, I know it. But somehow by working together, and here we are 10 years on, it's broken down those kind of things. And now we've gone, as a group, we've gone outside into the locality, into the community. And that's where it's enriching. And you can hear me say it. It's when you actually imbibe it and feel it and see it. It's very important. Yeah, it is.
Can I ask another question, Chris? The subscription that the farmers gave, has been a one-off subscription or is it an annual subscription?
Yeah, we basically came to the end of 3 years and we said, oh, crumbs, what are we going to do? We've got no money. And we were expecting Gemma to work free of charge. Well, hang on a sec, guys, we can't do that. No. We value this as a project going forwards? And after 3 years, everybody said, absolutely. What do we need to do? So for a short-term measure, we said, right, let's all put a hand in the pocket and help out. How do we do it fairly? Let's do it on acreage basis. And I think it's 50p an acre or something like that. And everybody said, fine.
Yeah, it was £1 a hectare. So yeah, and everybody chipped in. But it was never intended to be. I know some groups do fund themselves through annual subscriptions, and they like that independence, which is great. I also think that if you don't pay for something, you don't value it as much. So I think it's a good thing to ask people to donate now and again. So I think we might be doing it again at some point. if we want to fund a particular project and don't have any other way of doing so. And as I say, it funds the unsexy stuff, you know, the kind of the stuff that funders don't fund, you know, things that the boring stuff like submitting the company returns, which I spent half a day doing, and you know, all of that sort of the nuts and bolts behind the scenes that, you know, it's not about tree sparrows or ponds or, you know, young carers. It's about spreadsheets.
Edward, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Karen. Yes.
Thanks. I'm Karen, Chief Executive of Wildlife Trust, and sadly very familiar with what you just said, Gemma, in terms of spreadsheets and the boring stuff behind the scenes. But I'm interested in, Julian, I think, has put in the chat, the kind of similarities and differences, if you like, between the farmers in your area and the typical farmers down in Penwith area, because it's the nature of farming is quite different. And do you have a younger demographic of farmers and landowners? I don't know. I just wonder what the communities are like between the two. Not the community people, I mean the farmers.
The two groups that I look after, you mean?
The farmer group.
No,
an idea of the farm, the makeup of the farmers up on the downs, I think.
The demographic of your farmers, yeah.
It probably is. Well, I used to do quite a lot of work in Devon and just into Cornwall. So I kind of, it is very, very, very different. But I think the beauty of this, that it doesn't matter because there's no format. So it's kind of what works with your groups and what your demographic and your farming. It's totally, as I say, I've got these two groups of farmers that I work with, one in the Marlborough Downs, one on Salisbury Plain. They couldn't be more different. And the setups are completely different. But in terms of what they get from being in a group and what they enjoy and the, you know, the kind of the benefits and the way I see the two, or I've seen the two groups develop in their, you know, in their understanding of the wildlife that's on their farms, and you know, the same questions are asked and the same sort of aspirations. They're totally different. But as I say, give me a group anywhere in the country and any system, and I could set it up like this, and that's what we said right from the beginning.
There's another aspect that I'm particularly interested in Cornwall in conversations with our local enterprise partnership is the extent to which the 4,000 farms in Cornwall are reliant and dependent on BPS, and what impact that's going to have on their appetite for change going forward, and how many of those businesses are going to actually fail. They're going to sink or swim potentially unless they enter Elms. Is that so much of a critical issue where you are?
Yeah, I think so, and ever more so. And come on, we all know BPS is going to disappear over 7 years. Okay, so are you better to be working collectively rather than an individual on this kind of basis? Yes, you are. Is there, coming back to the sociability and just being able to throw, you know, when it's a lonely life out there, to be able to say, what's it like for you, and what are you doing, and what can we do together, and what are our opportunities? Yes, there are going to be more opportunities for you together than there will be as a single person. And the other thing is government gets it. And why do we think the government is putting money behind these groups? Because they realize bang for buck, they'll get more value out of putting money into a group than they ever will into individuals. And that's the one message that I think we've done anything by sending it up. That's been recognized. As regards to your previous comment, and not to get away from the last one, but the way you can make things work. Gemma went out to Kenya last year, and she got a group going out there of disparate farmers. And therefore, you can apply the same, it's the same methodology, it's the same working with people. It is, you can make it work.
Yeah, so my Kenyan farmers, their holdings are anywhere between half an acre and 5 acres. 5 acres is a massive farm in Kenya. So, you know, kind of Cornwall somewhere in the middle between the Marlborough Downs or Salisbury Plain and Kenya. So yeah, I just think it's that flexibility that's key, and just trying to get people to talk to one another in terms of the success of a group. I don't know that we've answered your question. I'm not quite sure that we have.
Yeah, I wasn't really asking about the methodology as applies to your. I wasn't criticising your methodology, or I was just trying to understand what the nature of farming was like where you are. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Ed was just asked a question: do we need a farmer group? I think there's already some, isn't there? Maybe we need to map out what's there already and see what's missing.
Yeah, you can find out. The GWCT have put a very unhelpfully titled Farmer Cluster website together. When you, as I say, just remember that cluster is a particular kind of group, but it includes everybody that they know about. So if you go on there, you'll see that there's a map, and you'll be able to find out all your local groups on that map, or most of them at least anyway. Certainly any that are funded.
Okay, it's 1 minute to 6, and I know that Gemma, you've got to keep going, and that's it. Edward, I think I'll bring it back to you. And is there any other burning question out there that somebody wants? Or you can always come back to us. Edward's got all our details, etc.
Yeah, yeah. Well, has anybody got any more questions? No. Anyway, I'd like to thank Kristen and Gemma for giving up their time today. I mean, I think it's been a real eye-opener, and hopefully the group can look at how we can go away from here. So thank you very much, everyone, for turning up, and thank you for Chris and Gemma for giving up your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And by all means, listen, if you want any more detail, you want to follow up on anything, Edward's got our details. We're here to help. Absolutely. Good luck to you.
And maybe once we're allowed to move around, we can come up and see you.
Come up and see us. Too right.
Yeah.
Post-COVID.
So just on that point, actually, in 2019, we organised a forum up on the Downs for all of the different groups. So we invited all of the groups to come and see us, and we had, I can't remember how many groups, but that was really interesting. And I was hoping that would be an annual thing, where a different group would host, each year. So hopefully that will carry on. The other thing to say is that we do have quite a comprehensive website. The Marlborough Down Space for Nature website. It is just called Space for Nature. So there's a lot of information about what I'm sort of conscious today that we've been talking about the kind of the mechanics, if you like, rather than some of the fun things that the much more fun talk is the one where we talk about tree sparrows and ponds, and show lots of pretty pictures of people doing things, because that's much more, that's what we're about. But if you wanted to see a bit more of that, then do go and have a look at the website, where you should find lots of information. Okay, but thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.